Hey, welcome to another interview with Sound Faith Consulting. I'm Tyson James, the president of Sound Faith Consulting. I have a very special guest with you today, but one of the reasons I'm bringing him in is because there's a lot of channels out there that do content on Christian philosophy, theology, and apologetics. And there's just not a lot of content out there that kind of takes a look behind the scenes at what it takes to run a ministry like the one that this person helps to run. And so I wanted to bring that to you. This is a guy who is a very good friend of mine, and I've been working with him for many years now. And so I'm very excited to bring him on. So let me bring him now. This is Michael Lapine, the executive director of Reasonable Faith. Michael, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Tyson. It's a super honored to be able to do it, and so I appreciate it that you could have me on.
Yeah, well, for all the people out there, Michael's one of these guys that he's always, when he's on a video call or whatever, he's the guy that's muted and his video is off. Like he's behind the scenes making sure that everything's working. So it's interesting to see you here, in front on the stage now, sharing your wisdom with us. So I'm
Yeah,
really
it's funny. We were talking about it just before we came on that it feels weird to be on this side of it. Like with Dr. Craig, I am always the one making sure all the technical things are working right, making sure his mic is straight. Making sure that his hair is just right. All those types of things. So it's kind of like this is weird being on this side. But still, I appreciate it. It's great.
I can tell when neither you or Jan are there with him because the hair starts to get a little frazzled. Yeah,
Yeah,
that gets a little
yeah,
crazy.
yeah,
No, but
absolutely.
definitely Reasonable Faith. For people that don't know, I started as a volunteer chapter director for
Mm,
Reasonable Faith back in 2010, 2013,
mhm.
and eventually got hired on as the global chapters director. And so you and I have been working ever since then. You were the one that hired me on there. And so I've been able to see you work at Reasonable Faith,
Mm.
and I've just been so blown away at your leadership, the skills that you bring to the
Mm.
table. And so I'm delighted to have
Mm.
people get some insight from you on what it takes. So before we jump into that, let me just ask some personal questions here. So,
Sure.
like I always ask my guests, what is your earliest memory?
Yeah, it's funny to think about that, because when you think about your memories, you kind of go, "Oh, I just kind of remember them as I need to." And so thinking about that, like, what is my earliest memory? I was actually talking to Jacqueline a little bit about that too. What were some of her earliest memories? And I thought that was interesting. It's fun as I think back about my life. I think one of my earliest memories, if not my first memory, is maybe a weird one because it was actually not a happy one. I suppose it's because I remember being about three ish and we were living out in Oklahoma, here where I live now, but we were living out by Lake Latonka in Southwest Oklahoma. And we were living in a little trailer park area, and we were at a friend's house. And I remember being a young 3 year old, and it was one of those moments where they turn on a movie for their kids. And my parents, of course, weren't there. It's a different day and age, where they let you go wherever, and it was a safe neighborhood. And so we were there at their house, and they turned on Nightmare on Elm Street, Freddy Krueger, and all of that. And as a young 3 year old, it just scarred me, forever. And so I don't know if it's just like one of those things that you go, oh man, like I can never not look at the drain in the bathtub anymore. It's like you just get scared out of your mind as a 3 year old, and you just never forget those high impact moments. But it's funny, like I have a lot of memories when I was young, when I was even there are some things that I remember when I was a kid that my mom was like, oh yeah, you were about 2 years old, going to school with my dad. My dad was a doctor, and so we didn't have childcare when I was that age, and so he would take me to his classes with him. And in his psychology classes, the psychology professor would say, hey, how old is he? Okay, yeah, he's 3. He's okay, he's an old 2. Okay, well, bring him up here, let's do an experiment on him. So that was kind of some of my earliest memories that I have, though, with my dad. And then of course having wonderful experiences at the neighbor's house. So
Oh man, that is so you're still traumatized to this
yeah.
day.
Yeah, yeah, I can finally stand on the drain, in the shower. That's okay. Personal information there, I guess. But
Oh, that's wild. And well, and like I always say, there's a whole range when I ask people this question of
mm,
the ages,
mm,
how early those memories are. And 2 or 3, that's pretty early.
Yeah.
We get some that's, like 5 or 6, and then some that don't have any memories before like 9
Wow.
or 10, which is wild to
Yeah.
me.
Wow.
Um, yeah, so
Mm.
pretty cool. So, were you raised in a Christian home? You're working for a Christian ministry. Was
Sure.
that your upbringing?
Yeah, so I don't remember a time not going to church.
Hmm.
My Right about the time that we were born is when my parents really gave their life to Christ, and even then, it was right about when I was a baby that really my dad finally turned over a new leaf. Yeah, it was actually even just recently that my mom told me that she said my dad passed away back in 2011. I know he wouldn't mind me sharing the story anyway, but that he came home drunk and couldn't remember where he was, what he was doing, but he had to go to work, so he left. And she said, I gathered up you and your sister. I have an older sister. She said, and I went to the grocery store where he was an assistant manager and said, we're going to my mom's, and if you don't clean up, then we're leaving. And that was something that for him, it just like that's what needed to happen, for him to just turn over a new leaf. And he never did it again. He literally was just one of those guys that could, just kind of like Paul says, just take it out back and kill it, just that's Oklahoma paraphrase of Paul, put to death the works of the flesh and such. And so that's in essence what he did. And they started going to church. And so that's really, I don't remember that. And so that's what was interesting to kind of hear some of that story of really how that kind of came about. So I never remember a time where we didn't go to church. I grew up in multiple different churches and primarily non-denominational churches, but very sound churches. So it was great. That's kind of how I always remember growing up, and so never remember a time where we weren't going to church, we weren't involved, we weren't serving. I just remember that from the earliest parts of my life.
And so were there a lot of conversations about God in the home, or was it mainly like they would take you to church and you would get your theology there, or how did that
Yeah,
look?
it was primarily in the church. In fact, I remember even being at a very young age of like being the kid in kids' church that was asking all the questions. I remember being in about third grade and asking my children's leader, like, "Hey, the Bible says here that I shouldn't lust. What does that mean?" And for a kids worker, they're like, "Maybe you should ask your parents about that." So I don't really remember my parents and I, like, it was fairly fundamental, or not fundamental, but it was very basic. So hey, we're going to live good lives, we're going to honor God, we're going to go to church, but most of my upbringing in regard to theology and doctrine was done in the church, and then it was also just done through some of my own studies. I remember being in high school, and I wasn't one of those people that went out and partied and drank and slept around and all these other things. Like, I would go to work at my dad's clinic for a couple of hours doing some typing and reports for him. And then I would go home and study the scriptures. And for my 18th birthday, I remember getting all these commentary sets and all these things. And even before that, before I ever even went to college, that was just always my interest. I was always, when I was in a sophomore in high school, I started sending a mass email to all of my family and all that. It started with like 10 or 12, and they kept adding people to it. So after several months, it was like I was sending an email weekly to 50 something people, just, hey, here's what I'm studying. I'm studying the names of God. Here's all the things that I'm learning about that. Here's all the things I'm reading about this passage of scripture. And so that was kind of just always a natural inclination for me, I think, that the Lord just kind of put in my heart. And so it was just always kind of there for me. But that was certainly the home that I was brought up in, that it created an environment that I never felt thwarted in pursuit of God and in seeking after the Lord and studying the scriptures and learning things from there.
Yeah. Well, that's fantastic. So you mentioned the commentaries that you got
Mhm.
for your birthday. So let's get into books a little bit, because
Oh yeah.
anybody who's friends with you and sees your social media posts knows that you're an avid reader. And one of the things that really stands out is your love of classic
Mm.
literature. And
Yeah.
I'll let you explain what is classic literature and what is so appealing about these books.
Yeah, sure. So classical literature is typically considered everything from Homer to Augustine. And so it's really the classical period of Greek and Roman thought, philosophy, history, and all of that. And so for me, which you can see, I mean, you can see a whole row of them behind me up here. It is where I really have been almost exclusively in my reading for the last probably almost 5 years now. It started with actually watching the movie with Denzel Washington in it, The Equalizer, I think is the name of it,
Oh yeah.
where he's like, he's a retired assassin or something, whatever. And but in it, this he meets this young girl in a, like a Waffle House or something, and he's reading The Old Man and the Sea, I think is what he's reading. And she asks him what is it, and he says, "Oh, it's one of the 100 books you're supposed to read before you die." And I remember being at that point in my life, of course, I mean, I was probably, I guess, 35. I'm 40 this year, last year, so 35 or so. And really kind of feeling like I'm kind of tapped out on books. Like, what do I want to read? I'm tired of reading the same things over and over again. And it hit me all of a sudden. I thought that's a new interest for me, and so I'd reached out to a friend of mine who's a mutual. He's a good friend of my brother-in-law, Justin Bass, Dr. Justin Bass, and so I've known Justin for, gosh, I don't know, 10, 15 years, just through my brother-in-law. And so Justin and I just stayed in contact over the years. And so I reached out to him. I said, "Hey, I remember you mentioning something about the top 10 books, classics." And he just started me on this whole path, that he said, here's my list, Michael. Here's the list of all the things, all the books that I've liked to have read. Here's the ones that I have read. And I've just put them in all chronological order of the world's greatest books. Here's my top 100. Here's my top 500. And I was like, okay. So I took his list. I started researching some others, and I said, all right, here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to start at the beginning, and I'm going to start with who Cicero calls the father of history, which is Herodotus. And so I just picked it up and had, very little knowledge of Greek towns and provinces and people and all these dates and all these things. And so I really felt like a novice. Obviously, I was a novice at that time. And so, so for me, that's kind of just where I started. It's just from the beginning, because I found great meaning in Dr. Rufus Fears. He's a classicist at OU, actually just 15, 20 minutes down the road from me. And in his, he has a great lecture series called, I think it's like 30 books that have changed the world, 30 books that could change your life. And he just picks all kinds of amazing texts. And so that was kind of a starting point for me as well. And in it, he defines what a great book is. And to answer your question, I think, why the great books, why the classics, for example. And he lays out three things. He says, first of all, it needs to have a great theme. And he said the classics certainly have, these great books have great themes. What is the meaning of life? What is the purpose of life? Is there life after death? What about marriage? What about love? What about power? What about authority? What about what do we give our lives to? What is wisdom? What is courage? What is virtue? What does it mean to have wisdom and to live a virtuous life? So it needs to have a great theme. Secondly, he said it needs to be written in a noble language. So he doesn't mean like Greek or Latin or something, but he says it needs to be written in language that elevates the soul, that causes you to sort of look beyond just the here and now, to sort of think about things that are higher and better than what we typically would in our normal lives. Certainly, not like just a fictional story, but that it's written in a way that just causes you to think deeper and to be more reflective about your life. He says, then thirdly, it needs to stand the test of time. And certainly the classics have done that. All of the classics, all the ones behind me, and all the others as well that I don't even have yet. There's still a number of them that they're all written before the printing press. And so because of that, it speaks to this very high-minded view that each generation had to handwrite these books. That's what's crazy to me. That always comes home to me. They had to handwrite them, and they had to be so important for them that they said the future generations need to gain the wisdom that we have gained from these writings. And in order to do that, we have to preserve them. So to preserve them, we have to handwrite them to make sure that each successive generation moves on. One of the things that stood out to me about about the classics is that many of them are just lost to history. So, for
Yeah.
example, Titus Livius, Titus Livy, that we typically just call him Livy, I think he wrote 143 books on Roman history from the earliest time until his time in the first century. And we only have like 35, 45 of them. All the others, they're gone. So many plays from different poets and different writers and playwrights and such, they're just gone. They're referenced, or we have little snippets of them here and there, but they're just gone. So the ones that we have are greatly, greatly valued, which of course we have a lot of scholasticism and monasticism, the monks and such of the early church that help to preserve those things for us. And if I may, I actually had something. I knew you were going to ask that question. So I actually had like just a quick snippet from Livy, if that's okay,
Yeah,
to
yeah,
be able to
absolutely.
share, because in his introduction, Livy actually writes to the reader, and he has this line in it as he's talking about history that for me, I actually gave it to my son and read it to my son. I have a 16-year-old son, Caden, that I just shared this with him the other day. He was writing an essay. He's going through, we homeschool our kids through classical education. I know you and I have talked about that quite a bit. And so this is one of the things that Livy says that I underlined it, and I just thought it was so fantastic. He says, I would have them, I would have him, the reader, you and I, trace the process, and he's talking to Romans at his time, but for any of us, trace the process of our moral decline. To watch first the sinking of the foundations of morality as the old teaching was allowed to lapse, then the rapidly increasing disintegration, then the final collapse of the whole edifice, and the dark dawning of our modern day when we can neither endure our vices nor face the remedies needed to cure them. He says the study of history is the best medicine for a sick mind. For in history, you have a record of the infinite variety of human experience, plainly set out for all to see. And in that record, you can find for yourself and your country both examples and warnings, fine things to make as models, and base things, rotten through and through, to avoid. And so I've always found that it's right there in the introduction to his work. So I've always found that to be quite motivational in studying the classics, because most of the books that I feel like are written today are just worthless whenever you read the classics. I don't know how many books that I've written in the margins, quotes and things from books that I go, oh, that's a leadership principle that John Maxwell wrote about, or some of these other folks have all written about. I'm like, oh, it's right there in the classics. So sorry, that's a much longer answer than you probably anticipated, but it's something I am certainly passionate about. It's something that I really enjoy. It's something that I love. And so I try to take every opportunity I can to try to stir up passion within others to say, gosh, pick up some of the classics. Some of them are difficult, some of them are hard, but they're worth it.
Yeah. Well, I think if ever a passion should be contagious
Mm,
and shared, I think it would be that.
mm.
Thinking about that Livy quote and the applying it to where we are in our culture today,
Yes. Yes.
just how eroded the
Yeah.
moral fabric is in our
Yes.
society. I think we could do worse than to look back in history at
Mm.
the cycles of moral progress and decline
Yeah.
and learn from that.
Yeah.
So beautiful, beautiful quote. Thank you for bringing that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Well,
did you have any?
yeah, I was just gonna add something to that. It's funny to that famous quote of those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it, and those who
Mhm.
do know history are doomed to watch others repeat it. And so it's wild to me to look at history and just go, gosh, yeah, this is all of human experience is right here for us to be able to learn from. And so was it Eleanor Roosevelt, I think, that said, "You'll never make all the mistakes. You'll never live long enough to make all the mistakes that you can. So learn from others." I think it was her. I can't remember. Somebody might correct me. But I think that that's very true for us to be able to look back at others and go, yeah. I mean, Plutarch's Lives is a great example of that. That Plutarch writes in his introduction to Alexander the Great's biography, where he's writing about 30 Romans and 30 Greeks, and then compares the two of them together. And he says, look, I'm not necessarily writing history. I'm not just trying to write facts. I'm writing biography. I'm purposely trying to write and give moral lessons that we can be able to give. And so these are such profound books. Even John Adams writing about Thucydides and the history of the Peloponnesian War. He's writing to John Quincy Adams, his son, and he says it's worth your time to do a thorough investigation of Thucydides. It's worth your time. The speeches that are in there, some of the greatest speeches about government and freedom and democracy and all of these things are all found. They're all there, and they all influenced our founding fathers here in the United States. So I go, gosh, if this type of knowledge gave rise to some of the greatest minds in history, from Charlemagne all the way until the advent of the American public school system, gosh, that's an education I definitely want. I want to be able to gain. I want my kids to have that, and I want to make sure and help others to be able to find that if they can.
Yeah, that's absolutely fantastic. Um, yeah, we could talk about this forever.
Sure.
This is like hours and hours of conversation right here. I think you need a podcast of your own. Honestly, I mean,
Well,
I know you could just talk about this for hours. So if you guys who are watching want Michael to start his own podcast, leave a comment
that's funny.
that says, "Get going, Michael."
Yeah, I
But no,
appreciate it.
so you mentioned the 100 great books.
Mm,
How many of those have you gone through? Do you know?
Yeah, I don't know exactly off the top of my head, but I have certainly made great progress in the last 4 or 5 years. Certainly, one things that I have learned is that many classics are not meant to be read quickly. Some
Mm,
are meant to be read slowly. Some books are meant to be read even out loud. And so I have read a few of them multiple times. I've read Thucydides a couple of times. Virgil's The Aeneid I've read through a couple of times. And so really all these ones behind me, everything from Herodotus through Augustine, I've probably read, for me, on at least on my list that I have of the books that I have, I've probably read about 95% of the ones that I currently have. So I've read probably at least 30 or 40 of them that I feel fairly good about, that I could have a conversation with someone about. But again, even for me, I'm just like, gosh, I still feel like a student. It's sort of that Dunning-Kruger effect, that it's like the more you're learning, the more I'm like, gosh, I don't know anything about the classics. And Jacqueline has to remind me, my wife has to remind me, like, babe, you know more than most people. I'm like, yeah, but I'm still an idiot. I still don't know any of these things. And I still can't speak Greek yet, so I can't read them in the original languages. And so if I can't do that, I'm not a real classicist. But it's interesting to have conversations with people about those things. Mike Licona, we've emailed even a few times, especially about, he's talked a lot about Plutarch's Lives and things. So I've picked his mind a few times about things. And so it's great. I really enjoy it. I hope that people are inspired to just pick some up and start somewhere, especially if you're looking for something, if you're tired of sort of the doldrums of reading, to say, yeah, this is something I want to kind of grow to become a specialist in.
that's fantastic. At least you're not on the rising first part of the Dunning-Kruger
Yeah.
effect. You're like already,
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
realizing there's depth to it.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. That's very true.
I'm the admin for our YouTube channels, Reasonable Faith YouTube
Yeah.
channels, and I can tell you that the majority are not past that first rise on the Dunning-Kruger
Yeah. Isn't that the truth? Gosh, that's so true. Yeah. Yeah, social media gives a platform for idiots, that you just go, oh, used to, you had to write a column, you had to write something to the editor of a newspaper or something, and social media has just convinced so many people that they're more intelligent than what they are, unfortunately. And so it's just like, well, that's just part of it. You got to be patient with people, I suppose, but that's the way that it goes.
Oh my goodness, yeah. All right, well, let's keep cruising here. So you mentioned that from the time you were born, your parents were taking you to church. So you
Yeah,
grew up in the church, and now
sure.
you're a pastor, right, out there in
Mm-hmm.
Oklahoma. So I've been a churchgoer pretty much my whole life as well, and I can tell you that being a pastor was probably close to the bottom of my list of vocations that I would
Yeah,
consider.
yeah,
There's just so much that goes into it,
mm,
and it can be grueling. I know, I've seen
sure,
it. So,
sure.
what made you decide to become a pastor? Was that
Mm,
something that was very natural to you growing up, and you just
mm.
felt led into it, or was it something that you were kind of pushed into?
Yeah, I remember being about 12 years old, and being at a kids camp, young adults camp, and feeling a genuine call from the Lord to go into ministry. I was planning on becoming an architect, even at that age in my life. I love math. I love drawing, and I thought, gosh, how fun would that be to build buildings, and design buildings and all of that. And it was at this camp that I remember praying and just, God, what do you want me to do with my life? Is this what you want me to do with my life? And so from a very young age, I sort of felt that call to say, you're going to go into ministry. And I didn't know exactly what that was going to look like. I met Jacqueline, my wife, when we were at a Bible college, seminary, university, whatever you want to call it. But that's where we met. And she kind of felt the same way when she was growing up. And so for us, I grew up around a number of people, even going to Bible college, hearing people say, well, I feel called to be a senior pastor or to be a missionary, or to be a youth pastor, whatever. And for me, I never felt like a specific thing. Um, I feel like I kind of, maybe the Lord was just calling me to be a Swiss Army knife, that it's sort of like whatever needs to be done, that's what I feel like I can do. You're not going to use a Swiss Army knife to, cut down a tree, but if you had to, you probably could. It'd take you a little longer, but you could do it. And so I've done a little bit of everything in my ministry life. everything from, of course, preaching and teaching and, counseling and all those types of things, burying and marrying. Um, Certainly for me, though, I think as I've gotten older, I've realized that I kind of lean more into the teaching side of
Mm.
ministry rather than sort of the pastoral side. So even though I have like associate pastor, it's just a part-time thing for me because my full-time thing is with Reasonable Faith. But still, it's sort of that side of me that gives me that outlet where I can still preach, I can still teach, and I can still help lead teams of people. Because I think for one of the things, I think you're right. I think pastoral ministry is an extremely difficult vocation. It's extremely difficult in the sense that you're dealing with people, and people are messy. People will love you one minute and then stab you in the back the next. It's just that's the way
Mm.
that it goes. And so that's just part of it. You just accept that as like, well, that's just part of the cross that I'm called to bear. But at the end of the day, you're still a shepherd, and that is the aspect that I feel like is very important for me. You probably don't want me to be your counselor, like that's not, hey, I'm having problems with it. Okay, well, here's the three things you need to do. If you do these three things, everything will be fine. Like, and after that, if you're not going to do those three things, I ain't got time. I'm ready to move on. Like that's kind of that. So that's the pastoral side that I'm not a very good pastor at. It's kind of like Michael Scott talking to Dwight. Like, hey, what's the best advice I ever gave you? Don't be an idiot. Like that. That's the advice I have for everybody. Just don't be an idiot, and you'll be fine. And so for me, like the
Easier said than
pastoral,
done.
yeah, that is very true, very true. Even for us sometimes, and so for me, I really love the teaching and the preaching because for me, like for example, right now, the classes that I've kind of helped develop for our church, I teach a theology class for our church that we do every single week, and we run it in semesters and such. And so for the last several years, we're actually about to graduate our first class of people in our church that have been through New Testament survey, Old Testament survey. They've been through biblical interpretation, an in-depth look at the genres of literature in the scriptures. They've been through systematic theology. They've been through Christian apologetics, which of course we use all kinds of Reasonable Faith stuff for that. And then right now they're wrapping up their last semester with church history. And so I love being able to teach. But like I will say this: in some of the churches that I went to, I didn't learn specifically like how do you study the Bible, for example, like biblical interpretation, hermeneutics, and things like that. We learned the Bible really well, but we didn't learn how to study the Bible for ourselves. It wasn't until I went to a Bible university that I learned that. And I remember going through a Bible study class, biblical hermeneutics class, and thinking, why was I never taught this? Why wasn't this an aspect of my discipleship growing up in the church? And so I told myself, any church I'm ever a part of, this is going to be something that I want to teach. And so it has been in any church. We've been a part of a church plant, and now we've been at the church that we're at, South Point in Southwest Oklahoma City, for 8+ years now. And so I'm so grateful that we also have pastoral leadership that allows that to be able to thrive and take place. So that's kind of been a little bit of my story in pastoral ministry. I've done all kinds of, I've led worship, I have preached and taught, I've overseen the technology side. I've done a little bit of everything, except for kids ministry. That was always Jacqueline's thing. I'm good on kids ministry. That's not something I'm interested in doing. Look, that's where I draw the line, Jesus. Uh, Lord, really. But I love it. It does give me that outlet, being able to teach people and see their eyes come alive when you're teaching them how to study the scriptures.
Mm.
That is something that for me is one of the best, for me, one of the most rewarding things in pastoral ministry, helping people to be able to know how they can be able to study the scriptures for themselves, and connecting the dots for them of seeing their eyes awaken on that and go, wow, I didn't realize the Bible was that applicable for me. I thought you had to be a pastor to know how to do biblical hermeneutics. No, you don't. Like, you can learn these things just like I learned them. Like, there's nothing special about the knowledge that I have other than the fact that I spent the time to learn it and you haven't yet. So
Yeah.
spend the time. I always tell people, the Bible as well as you want to know it. Like, in our day and age, I mean, like, think of, even just between you and me, how many podcasts could we name that you could listen to for free, that you could get a great systematic theology, Dr. Craig's Defenders classes, right? I mean, that you could get graduate level theology teaching, Michael Heiser's stuff, even some of the Bible Project podcasts, and all these different things that you can learn so many great things for free. You don't have to go to seminary. So that's what I always challenge people with. Like, as much of the Bible as you want to know it. If you want to know it more, you can. It just is up to you and whether or not you want to invest the time in order to develop your understanding of the scriptures and theology and doctrine and philosophy and apologetics. All of these things are at your fingertips, literally your fingertips. It just depends on if you want it or not. So for me, that's the rewarding part of at least being that sort of stepping stone to help people grow to be everything that God wants them to know about himself.
Yeah, and thinking about your work with the Reasonable Faith Ministry,
Mm,
I think you're a perfect fit. Your
mm,
background, your heart for the gospel, your passion for
mm,
helping people see the truth of the gospel, I
mm,
think just meshes so well with your position with Reasonable Faith. And so
mm.
I think definitely God
Thank you.
has providentially ordered your life and the fact that you exist right now to mold
Sure.
you into just the perfect
Mm,
person to be the executive director of this ministry.
mm. Well, thank you for that.
So yeah, so speaking of apologetics and that topic, what was your introduction to Christian apologetics? Did you ever
Mm.
hear that growing up, or was it really like you just found Dr. Craig one day and that was it?
Yeah, I remember having a conversation with my brother-in-law. In fact, when we were helping start a church, so I was probably mid-20s. I did hear about a Christian apologetics class that a particular professor taught at the university that I was at. He was a guest professor, so he was only there for a year. So it wasn't like there was a Christian apologetics class all the time. And I was a sophomore. It was a junior, senior level class, so I was too young to be able to take it, unfortunately. So I would have liked to have taken that class and then seen kind of how it compared with how we do apologetics now and becoming familiar with Dr. Craig. But it wasn't until I was in my mid 20s that my brother-in-law, we were having a conversation. He was asking about the Canaanites, which is kind of a hot topic right now with Dr. Craig doing some interviews on it and such. And
Yep, yep.
and so I remember him asking me about that. And if I can just be candid, I know I can say this to you. Hopefully, your audience members don't think I'm being prideful or anything. But I felt pretty good about my answer. I was like, yeah, I feel pretty good about that. And I don't know actually. I haven't ever asked him if he felt like it was a good answer or not. But soon after that, he sent me a video of Dr. Craig. He actually found Dr. Craig searching for some things online, and he sent me. And the first video I ever saw of Dr. Craig, the one that he sent me, was. His when he is with Peter Atkins. It's the old version of that debate, and he has his 5 things. Well, what things about can we know that aren't proven by science? And he just goes down the list. And so I remember writing that down and memorizing it and just going,
Mm,
oh my goodness, this is so good. I cannot believe, who is this guy? And so I just started, and it was funny though, because once I started becoming more familiar with Dr. Craig, I was like, this name sounds familiar. And sure enough, I went looking back through some of my theology notes from some of my theology classes, and I had written his name out in the side and some of the margins. I was like, oh, okay. So I have heard of him before, but I just hadn't connected the dots.
mm,
And so that really just started my love for Reasonable Faith and for what Dr. Craig has done over the years and all of that. And so I felt a little justified, like listening to his defense of his view of divine command theory and all of that. I thought, okay, well, my answer wasn't exactly like Dr. Craig's. I mean, whose answer really is? But I thought to myself, I was like, oh, okay, but it's good enough. I thought for not having any introduction to apologetics, I felt pretty good about my response to it. So I thought that was kind of funny. I felt a little justified. I feel like I need to say that for your audience just to be able to know. But that was kind of my introduction to Dr. Craig. And so my brother-in-law got connected with Chris Shannon, who was one, I think, our first actual chapter director in Dallas. You might correct me if I'm wrong. I think that he was, though.
mm.
And so he got connected with that, and eventually they both got connected a little further with Dr. Craig and such. And so eventually they kind of co-executive led together. They both had full-time jobs. They're developing companies, all these types of things. So they just did it, to be able to help out the ministry. And so the ministry needed somebody to run social media. And so we were helping start a church. I was running social media, doing graphics design, video for the church that we were starting. And so he reached out to me and said, hey, would you be interested in coming on board and doing social media stuff for Reasonable Faith? And I was like, oh my goodness, I don't even have to think about that. Of course I will do that, because I had already had some things in my mind where I was like, why don't we post things more often? Why don't we put more videos on YouTube? Why don't we? There's so many things that Reasonable Faith could be doing, and just never realized really that God was already kind of preparing my heart and my mind to take up the mantle of this and help do videos and all of that stuff. And so that's what I first came on to do with Reasonable Faith, and did that for several years. Before I was ever approached about becoming the executive director. So it's weird now to think that I've been doing the executive director role I think like twice as long than as when I ever did the social media stuff, somewhere around there. Whereas that feels like such a much longer period of time. I think maybe just because it was earlier on. But that was really my first sort of introduction to reasonable faith, to apologetics. And I met Dr. Craig actually 2 years before I ever even came on board. I met him in 2010 at a apologetics conference at Denton Bible in Denton, Texas. And of course, back then I had a lot more hair at that time, and it was up and wild and crazy. And I have the picture. I actually sent it to him. I usually send it every year whenever it comes the anniversary of it. And I remember walking up to him to have him sign my copy of On Guard that I bought at that conference, and walking up and him just looking at me going, "Whoa," and look, that's wild hair. I'll never forget that, when he said that. And, oh yeah, we just kind of laughed. I mean, he doesn't remember it at all. Of course, he meets so many people, but it was just funny to be like, that was my first interaction with him, And I remember just feverishly writing down everything that he said because it was just so new and so fresh, And I remember thinking to myself, I look forward to the day when I don't feel like I need to take notes on this, when I can just sit back and enjoy the lecture and know what's being said and all of that. Kind of move along that Dunning-Kruger effect, a little bit, to bring that back up. But that's kind of my introduction to it, how I got connected to the ministry a little bit as well.
Well, so now that you've, toured around with him and accompanied him on so many trips, do you feel like you've gotten to a point where now you can sit back and just listen to the lecture and just enjoy?
Yeah, the only thing is that I sometimes still have to look up vocabulary words that he uses. Sometimes there's still those words where I'm like, okay, I've learned that word now. Now I've added that to my own repertoire of words that I can use to in my own fallacy, in my own, I don't know, where I feel like I need to prove something to somebody. I'll use a big word, I guess, if I need to, but I am still human, I guess. But there's still words that he uses. I'm like, goodness, Dr. Craig, I've known you. I've worked with you for well over a decade, and there's still words he uses sometimes. And I'm like, I got to look that up. I've never even heard that word before. But it is nice to sort of, having edited so many of his videos, and then of course Gabe Jones coming on, becoming our media coordinator, who's now been doing that for some 7-8 years, and just always watching our videos, always listening to them. I'm an audio and a visual learner, so if I can hear it and if I can see it, I have a really good memory, so I can be able to remember not an eidetic memory, but that I can remember things fairly well. It is nice to kind of go, when I have people ask me questions about apologetics or even theological questions. I had a conversation with one of our church students yesterday. We're an offsite for a university, Christian university, where they can get their degree, and then they can also get practical things at the church. So it's a great mixture. It's a very different model than what I certainly grew up with. And so I was having a conversation with her, and we were talking about Molinism. She's having to write a theology in one of her theology classes about divine sovereignty. And so I had first brought up Molinism to her a few months ago. So we're having conversations about it. And it was great to be able to just be able to pull so many things that I know he's already said that I'm just like, this is just what Dr. Craig says about it, and so it is kind of funny to be able to think about those things. And it's so funny, though, how often things are just repeated because, for example, one of the things she said, I Googled it, I looked it up, and, as I was reading this person's response and corrections about Molinism, I realized I don't think that's what middle knowledge actually is. I think middle knowledge, I don't think he understands it. And I said, you totally understand now. You totally get the frustration of all of this. Many people don't understand what it is. I was like, and so like, and it just made me proud to go, oh, this 19-year-old theology student understands, oh, most people just don't understand what these things are, so it's just funny to kind of think about that. But yeah, it's funny how when you have listened to somebody like Dr. Craig so often and so much in your life, that some of the things that they have said just really become adopted and become a part of who you are. And whereas you don't even have to think about it, where you don't adopt it as like an appeal to authority, like, well, Dr. Craig says this, but it just becomes a part of who you are because you've fleshed those things out.
It, yeah.
That's right. That he has fleshed those things out, and then you've taken those ideas and you've fleshed them out yourself, and you've kind of but it just becomes a part of who you are. And so I think that's just become an invaluable part of me. I've told him that a number of times, that how grateful I am for his and Jan's ministry, because really Jan is just as much a part of this as he is. that he wouldn't be who he is if it wasn't for Jan. There's
Right.
such a wonderful, beautiful example of how God brings together people to create something beautiful. And the impact that their lives and their sacrifices and their impact in the world and their sleepless nights and the sacrifices they've made financially and of their time and talent through their whole lives in their ministry together, how that's impacted not only our lives, for you and me, we could say that, but how now that flows through us into the lives of others. It impacts our kids and future generations, and how we sort of carry on that torch to the next generation. So yeah, so it's been incredible, an incredible journey for me thus far, just to be able to experience all of this with him.
Well, if I compare Reasonable Faith to a car, and Dr. Craig is the owner and driver, and maybe Dan is like, the passenger, you're definitely the engine. I think your ability to steer this ship and really
Mm,
keep the thing going has been formidable. It's been remarkable. So I'm just pleased and blessed to be part of this
mm,
with you, and to see what all you've done with it.
mm,
Um,
mm,
Continuing on with the ministry questions, you've
mhm,
already kind of gone into how you started with Reasonable Faith. Now you're the
mhm,
executive director. How did that conversation come about,
mm.
where you're kind of being promoted to that position, and how long ago was
Yeah,
that?
yeah. So in December of 2016, the Craigs approached me and about possibly they were making some changes in some different roles, and so I kind of filled in. I didn't have the title of executive director at that point. I think I became the director of technology, and so just kind of helped to oversee things. Kind of still did the role of the executive director, which is probably why in my mind I just go, well, I know I didn't have the title then, but I felt like I was doing the job, and so was that next summer of 2017 that I kind of became the official executive director, was given the title. And so at that point, it really just became walking through how do we maintain this thing and how do we run this thing so that Dr. Craig is free to do what only Dr. Craig can do. And that was kind of, I think, a big part for me. Like, I'm a systems person, I'm a processor. You know me, I'm an introverted person. If you're talking about things that
No.
I'm passionate about, yeah, if you're talking about things that I'm passionate about, I'll talk your ear off all day. But if it's small talk, if it's, that's sort of the pastoral side of me, then I'm like, you can have it. I'm not interested in that. Um, I'm much more of the, let's talk about things that I find interesting and important. And part of those things is systems of going, okay, if it's sort of a Jim Collins book, Good to Great, where he gives that illustration, of getting the right people on the bus. And sometimes you can have the right people on the bus in the organization or ministry, but sometimes but you got to get the right people in the right seats on the bus. And
Mm.
so even if you have the right person on the bus, if they're in the wrong seat, they're going to be miserable. The ministry, the organization is going to be miserable. And so for me, that's kind of how I've always thought about Reasonable Faith. It's funny you use the illustration of the car. I remember telling Dr. Craig early on, I said, really, how I see us is like, you're the composer and I'm the conductor. I'm sort of the one that's just going to go up there, like, you drive the vision. You tell me what you want, and I'll go up and, okay, is everybody ready? Okay, ready, 1 2 3 4, okay, let's go. Okay, I need a little bit more from the percussion section, a little bit more staccato, let's hit these notes just right. And then I just report back to him, because he's the one who can write the music. That's not my gifting. That's not my talent. I feel like, to an extent, I'm a much more better number two guy than a number one guy, because I'm not really like a visionary person, but I kind of am the one that I always feel like I'm the guy who comes in and says, okay, if that's the vision, then here's how we go about doing that. We need to create systems. We need to get the right people on the team. And I really feel like much of the success of Reasonable Faith, in fact, I feel like all the success, one, is because the Lord has blessed the ministry, but two, it's because we have an amazing team of people. That
Yes.
includes you. I mean, we have an amazing team of people that are self-motivated people, that I'm not having to contact people and go, hey, why hadn't this gotten done yet? Tyson, how come you haven't been communicating with chapters? Like, I've never had to have that conversation. Like, it is a very easy job for me in that sense, because I feel like we've brought the right people. The Lord has brought the right people to the bus, and we have the right people on the right seats on the bus, that allows the bus to move forward in the direction that God ultimately leads Dr. Craig and Jan for us to be able to lead into. And so that's what makes this so wonderful, is because it is a digital team, as you well know. our team is all over the world. So you have people from all different time zones, and those are things that sometimes you don't really think about. Like when you go to a normal job, everybody's there, 8 to 5. You get your hour for lunch, whatever. I mean, and everybody's done, and then you check out. Well, for me, we were talking about Slack just before we came on, and for me, like my Slack bubble is always green. I'm always on because we have team members that are around the world. So there are people that they might need something at 8 o'clock on a Saturday night. And so I try to have a separation from my work life and my private life. So, and I think the team understands it and they appreciate that. But on the flip side of that, I always like just with my role, it's somewhat flexible. It needs to be flexible because we have team members all over the place because we're a digital ministry. Um, so I give a lot of credit to our team because we have an amazing team that is self-motivated, that wants to see people reached, that understands the purpose and the mission of the ministry. It's not about us. It's not about me. It's not about you. It's not even about Dr. Craig and Jan. It's about Christ. It's about bringing him glory. It's about making his name made known and made great. It's about reaching people. And so ultimately, that's what it's all about. So that's what drives us to keep moving forward.
Yeah. I absolutely agree with you. I couldn't have put it better, and I love that illustration of the symphony, and
Mm.
Dr. Craig being the composer, you being the conductor.
Yeah.
It's beautiful because when the music gets going and all of the pieces,
Yeah.
they're playing their parts.
Yeah.
That's when the music happens, and I think
Yeah.
Reasonable Fate's a beautiful symphony like
Mm.
that.
Yeah.
Um,
Agreed.
so as the executive director, that's a huge job. I mean, the
Mm.
ministry has grown so much
Mm.
and we've added so
Sure.
many different aspects that, it's just a lot of responsibility.
Mm.
So just maybe you can give us an idea of what all are you responsible for as
Sure.
the executive director?
Sure. So for me, I always kind of see myself as sort of I always have my fingers on everything happening in the ministry so that at any point in time, Dr. Craig can be able to say, "Hey, Michael, tell me about what's happening here. Tell me about what's happening there." So that I feel like my number one job is always making sure that he doesn't have to do my job. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's like John Maxwell's book, 360-Degree Leader. It's a great book. I highly recommend any of your listeners to be able to read that if you haven't. It's about how to lead from within, how to lead when you're not the leader, like when you're not the top person, when you're in the middle of the organization. Like how do I lead up? How do I lead with my peers? And then how do I lead down? I hate thinking about it that way because I like to think more in terms of sideways. Like I don't think of myself as like a superior role of somebody else in the ministry. But really, we're all in this thing together. We're all team members, so we're all equal. I just that's how I like to think about it. And so in my mind, it's always how can I help lead Dr. Craig? Well, I can help lead Dr. Craig by making sure he doesn't have to do my job for me. So that's the number one thing is always making sure that things are taken care of. I help manage his schedule. I help manage a lot of his connections with people and organizations and events just to make sure that, again, so that he doesn't necessarily have to worry about his schedule. So I kind of act as the go-between person to kind of make sure that his email and his information is private and kept private so that he's not being hounded by people.
Mm.
So that, I'm typically the one at an event going, okay, hey, that's all the time we have for, signing books and things. You're like, sorry, you've been waiting in line for an hour and you've waited for this once in a lifetime experience, but, he's tired. It's 10:30. He's got to go to bed, those types of things in traveling with him. I help make sure that just, especially on the technology side, with us being a digital ministry, the technology side is very, very important. So what are we doing with technology? How are we leveraging it? It's crazy now, like, and this is better than anybody, I feel like, with the use of AI and all these things. Like, I feel like for the first time for me, some things are starting to go beyond just what I even know about, because it's changing so fast and there's new ways of doing things. And that's where I think, of course, having a great team comes into play because we have team members, as you well know as well, that we have team members that I feel like have their finger much more on the pulse of where technology is going than I feel like even I do, which is great because I feel like, gosh, if I'm ever the smartest person in the room or if I know the most, then we have the wrong team. If I'm the smartest one and I know the most, this isn't going to work. I love surrounding myself with smarter people than me. I have no problem asking the dumb question of going, that's the only way that we learn. So it's keeping connections with our team, making sure that everybody's staying on task. In my mind, it's sort of making sure the web continually is being built, but you have like 15 or 16 spiders building that web, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
for me, a lot of that is just making sure that things are moving along and things are going well, to make sure that everything is oiled, to make sure, to a certain extent, it's even sort of that pastoral side. It's having conversations with our team members when things aren't going well in their life. It's like, hey, I've noticed some things aren't getting done on that front. Well, let me touch base with this person, and you find out, oh gosh, they're really struggling with some things. Like they have some things that are going on in their life. Like no wonder, like work is the least of your concerns right now. You have some major issues that are going on, and it's being sort of that pastoral side of leadership, of just helping our team sometimes during life, and praying with people and helping people to feel like they're continuously a part. I think that's always one of the things that for our ministry that is particularly unique with us being a digital ministry is the fact that we don't always get to see tangible results. Right. So in leading a digital team, it's constantly trying to refresh people, making sure that they know they're a part of a team, making sure that they see some of the results of what's happening. And that is kind of the struggle with having a digital ministry is we don't always see that tangible results. If it's church ministry, for example, you're teaching a class at your church, you can have conversations with people immediately after you've taught a lesson or preached a message or counseled somebody or whatever. And you can immediately hear feedback from them and you go, gosh, thank you, Lord. Okay. I feel like that was impactful. You can see some of the fruit of that moment. And with reasonable faith, it's not always that way. And so it's constantly making sure that our team knows, hey, listen, here is some of the very real impacts of the video that you made or the animation video that you're working on or the AI translation that you're doing. And so we track a lot of numbers in that way. So that's another thing that I do as well is to make sure to say, how are we doing in our overall engagements? That's one of the numbers, one of the important numbers for us that we track on a monthly basis of saying, where do we actually, what impact are we having? And so one way that we do that is through our engagements, to be able to see how many people are engaging, how many people are commenting, how many people are sharing, who's viewing these videos, what demographics are we hitting? And so that gives us a way to sort of sometimes pivot whenever we need to step back and say, well, okay, maybe we need to focus more on these types of videos. How can we be able to go in a different direction here? But like I said, we have an amazing team. So a lot of it is just working with our different team members to make sure that we're moving forward in the overall vision that Dr. Craig wants us to accomplish.
Yeah. Um, I wasn't going to ask you this, but since you brought up, like we're a digital ministry and, social media is a huge part of what we do. It's the main part of what we do. Maybe you can give the viewers some kind of idea of what those numbers look like right now, because we've recently hit some pretty huge milestones. So maybe you could share a little
Yeah.
bit of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So it really has been incredible to see especially over the last year or so, especially since 2020. I would say 2020 was certainly an outlier year, but it was also just a huge year, especially when just everything exploded. I mean, Dr. Craig was having like 3 interviews a week. I mean, everybody went digital, whether they were ready or not. They
Yeah.
were going digital at that point. So those types of interviews, they've certainly slowed down over the last few years. But for us, with regard to our engagement numbers, we've really continued to see just a gradual climb, continually moving forward. So this last year, we hit over 40 million engagements for the first time in our history, which is phenomenal. I mean, the next one below that was, I think, 33 million, and that was the year before. So that was 2022. 2023, we hit 40. So it's incredible to be able to see, and those are engagements, and that's where I think it's important. Like those, it's not necessarily like eyeballs on content, like your reach. For those that know social media at all, it's not just people seeing the content, but it's them actually engaging with it. Now we do count views, so that does count as a view in that sense. But it's people liking, commenting, sharing, those types of things, actually viewing our content, and not just letting it sort of flip through as they're scrolling through their feed. And so to be able to see, 2.5, 3.5, sometimes 4 million engagements on a monthly basis, you realize, wow, we are having a huge from across the world. That's what's incredible. Even the use of AI in our team members, Alan Sanchez and Raul in Mexico and Costa Rica, where Alan is, and Leandro, who is down in our regional chapter director in Brazil, Raul being our regional chapter director in Latin America. To be able to see these guys using AI and dubbing Dr. Craig's voice into a totally different language that he doesn't even speak at all. I mean, it's phenomenal to be able to see these things, and you see a massive impact.
Like
It's unbelievable. Like that's what I've told him. I said, like, it matches your inflection, your voice inflections, and all those things. Like, and that was always something that has concerned him in the past with having somebody dub something over his voice as a translator, because it's like, well, are they going to get his passion right? Are they going to get his inflections right? Are they going to get these things right? Like, you certainly want, and these AI programs do it amazingly, and it's just going to get better, right? I mean, it's the worst it's ever going to be is right now. So this type of technology is just going to keep getting better and better. And so, and again, then you have other AI, it'll redo his lips so it even looks like he's saying the words, just all kinds of great things like that. And I know lots of great ministries that are utilizing that same technology. But to be able to see, so for example, I'll take Leandro, for example. He just came on board with us as our regional chapter director in Brazil a year ago, about a year ago, little over a year ago. And so he started almost from the ground up. I think we had a couple of Portuguese platforms, but we weren't really posting anything because we didn't have anyone who spoke Portuguese in order to do anything with them. That's understandable. So he comes in and he starts posting regularly on these things, and then he starts utilizing this AI. He kind of field tested it for us first before we started using it in Spanish and things like that. And to be able to see his numbers now, I mean, just to give you an example, like last summer, for example, he would go from maybe 100 engagements in a month to then going to 1,100 engagements the next month, and then 3,500 engagements the next month. Now, 3,500 in comparison with 40 million, or on a monthly basis somewhere around 3 million, it's a small number with the overall. But when you start thinking about going from 100 to 1,100 to 3,300, that is a massive, massive change. And so to be able to see that incredible growth, all because of consistency, all because of saying this needs to be done on a regular basis. We're going to put out good content. And so Leandro has done an amazing job. Alan and Raul have done an amazing job with all of these different platforms that we're seeing. So, a number of years ago, before any of these guys came on, we weren't posting anything. Those international translated channels weren't even on my spreadsheet. So it's funny to kind of be able to think about that, to go back and look at 2018, 2017, even 2019 even, and going like, wow, look at all these different things that weren't, Spanish Instagram, Portuguese Instagram, some of their TikTok channels, all these things, they weren't even there. Their YouTube channels, they were totally missing from our repertoire. And so to be able to see these channels come in and grow has just been absolutely encouraging and phenomenal to see. Like, we're reaching people around the world. And that is where I think one of the appealing and sort of personally rewarding aspects of the ministry are, and I think you would probably agree with this, is to be able to see that it's not only a local impact, but it is a worldwide one, that we're able to reach people through technology. And it's just kind of that epitome of working smarter and not harder, and utilizing the technology to be able to help us reach more people.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I love the fact that you and others in reasonable faith, that like the board members and things like that, have seen the potential impact of incorporating AI and
Yeah.
are really being smart about it. We're doing our research and our due diligence,
Sure.
and really incorporating in ways that are allowing us to have a greater impact. And so I look forward to seeing, like you said, the pace of the development there is just outrageous. So I think our team, like you said, is really staying ahead of the curve on that. So I'm super excited to see where that goes.
Yeah, me too.
All right. So going more towards the leadership side of things, and just you as a leader, for people that know me, they know that I've done corporate work in the past, and that I was also in the military. And so I've seen good leaders, I've seen some not so good leaders, and I have to say that you're absolutely one of the best leaders I've ever had the pleasure of working with.
Wow.
And that's not, trying to build, fluff you up or anything. That's just facts. You're a great communicator, you're humble, you amplify people's strengths, you're passionate, which is coming through in this interview. You facilitate team cohesion. You really bring out the best in people. And the list of your qualities goes on and on. But just thinking about you and your capacity for leadership, and I don't know if you've reflected on this very much, but have you always had a knack for leadership, or is that something that you've had to work to cultivate?
Yeah, I think there has certainly been I've never thought about this before, honestly. I do think that has always been a certain predisposition towards leadership, I feel like, in my life. I remember being in second grade, and I always prayed over my food in the cafeteria for lunchtime. And so I remember my second grade friends asking me like, "Hey, what are you doing? Why are you doing that?" And just saying, "Well, I just want to give thanks to God for my food. It's what we do at home, but I also want to give thanks right now, for my food." And so I'd start having a few people start praying, blessing their food, and then by the end of the year, my entire second grade class was praying for their food and giving thanks every single day. And so it's kind of funny. I hadn't even thought about that, until recently. And so I feel like I've always sort of had this predisposition towards certain leadership things. I mean, if you take John Maxwell's leadership as influence, but for me, I also love the ideas of leadership. That leadership is really just about helping other people achieve their goals and finding that you're achieving your goal in the end. I suppose one of our seven core family values that we have as a family that define success and failure for us. The very first one is to be helpful. That's something that always in my life, that's something that's always naturally been there. How can I be helpful? How can I be helpful to you? How can I be helpful to our team? How can I be, oh, what's that person? What does that person need? How can I help them? And so I feel like for me, that's a natural part of leadership. Maybe it's because I have a natural inclination towards being helpful. That's what I like to do and to be. And so I feel like that I've always kind of had that sort of natural desire. It's not ever something that I've really ever sought to be. I've never really sought to be a leader. And I think that's something that in reflecting over my life, I was thinking about a quote just yesterday. In fact, it was a plaque. I still have it. It's in a box now, but I always had it on my desk for years and years and years. I bought it when I was in maybe junior high school, maybe a freshman in high school. And I looked it up because I was like, oh, I forgot one of the lines that was in it, and I found out. I think it's General MacArthur that actually said it, but he said something to the effect of that a leader has the courage to stand alone, the confidence to stand alone, the courage to make tough decisions, and the compassion to listen to the needs of others. He does not set out to be a leader, but becomes one by the quality of his actions and by the quality of his actions and the quality of his intent. In the end, leaders are much like eagles. They don't flock, you find them one at a time. And I always kind of let that be sort of ever since I was in junior high school, sort of let that become sort of a model for me with regard to leadership of just going, yeah, like I'm do I really feel the need to set out to be a leader? Which Paul in the New Testament says, if anyone desires to be an elder, he desires a good thing. He's talking about a leadership position in the church of teaching doctrine and all those things. So I don't think that it's bad to seek after a leadership position or a role. But for me, I don't think that it's ever something I really ever sought out. I never sought out to be the executive director. It wasn't something I was like, hey, I really want to do this. I never even really sought out to be a pastor and a teacher and things like that. It was just sort of something that I feel like was sort of thrust on me, and it became an opportunity that I feel like the Lord sort of opened the door and said, here's an opportunity that I want you to walk through. And him knowing that I would walk through that, giving that set of circumstances, for me, I just kind of find some hope in that. I think sometimes even on days when I don't feel qualified to be the executive director, I don't feel qualified to be a pastor, or on days where I feel like, gosh, I don't have the ability to do this. It's in those moments that I actually take comfort in knowing, in the Molinist view, I hate to kind of bring that up again, but it really does bring a great deal of comfort, doesn't it? I mean, to be able to sit back and go, but God, you knew that I would accept this role if offered it. And so therefore I am right where you knew I was going to be in this moment. And so I can be able to find peace and I can find rest in that, to know that you're at work in my life. And for whatever reason, I think there are better qualified people that could do this job even better than me. But I'm the one that's here right now, God. So I'm going to rest in that, and I'm going to rest that you're in control and that you're working through my life as long as I'm in this role to fulfill it. And so I think there's a great deal of comfort in that for any leader, whether that's pastors or teachers or leaders or whoever it is that is listening to your podcast, of going, gosh, like rest in that. Like God knew you were going to be in this position. So even in moments when you feel like you're not qualified, you still step back and go, but God, I know that I'm here for a reason. I just share with my kids Ephesians 2:10, that we are God's workmanship, that he's gone in advance in Christ Jesus, that he has prepared good works in advance for us to do, to rest in that and say, okay, God, I'm going to rest in that and know that you're in control and you're leading me. So I don't think I've ever sought to achieve a leadership position, but I think what drove me to be in leadership positions was I just want to be helpful. So what can I do to help you grow in whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish?
Yeah, so I mean, it's funny. That's kind of similar to how I ended up in this role with Reasonable Faith. I started off as
Sure.
a volunteer chapter director, and then
Yeah.
I tried to be faithful with that and do a good
Mhm.
job. And I saw that there was an opening for um, being on the question of the week overflow
Mhm.
answer team, right? We get
Yeah.
so many questions
Yeah.
sent to the website that Dr. Craig can't answer them all. So we have
Yeah.
a team of people that takes those and answers those. So I said, I can do that. So I got involved in that. And then when the previous chapters director, Stephen McAndrew, was stepping
Mhm.
down,
Yeah.
I think he saw that I was being helpful
Yeah.
in these
Yes.
ways and drop my name
Yeah.
as a possible replacement.
Yep.
And so I think that's an overriding lesson here is
Mm.
if
Sure.
you are considering how you might be a leader in
Mhm.
uh, Christian ministry or anything like that, being helpful is just a really good way to go because
Yes.
if you're faithful in a little, you may be given a
Yes.
lot, and I think that's
Yeah.
definitely been true in your situation as well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think it's one of the most important things. I think it's one of the things too about like learning to lead up, coming back to 360-degree leader, of just being helpful for the leaders that are above you. That if you can be able to help them not have to do your job or have to critique you in your job, but being able to go, hey, what can I, in fact, what, not only to keep you from having to do my job, but what can I do to help your job be better? What can I do to help you become? And I've always found whatever, I can't remember who said it, but they said, become the leader that you wish you always had. And I
Mm.
think that that's a great challenge for us to go, okay, well, what did I want when I was in high school? What kind of a leader did I want when I was in college? What kind of a leader what kind of a boss would I like to have? Okay, well, then I want to become that leader. I want to become that boss so that ultimately I'm helping to become what I always wished I had for myself. And so I think that that's a good reflective principle and lesson that people can be able to take for their own life.
Good. Well, just kind of wrapping up the leadership aspect there. What are maybe two or three top pieces of advice you would give to
Mm.
people who are looking to improve their leadership skills?
Mm. Yeah, sure. One thing I would say is don't ever get satisfied with the knowledge of where you are. In the sense that I think it's easy for us to feel like we've arrived sometime. Like sometimes when you get that job, when you get that promotion, when you start that business and you're just like, oh, okay, great. All right, I've got it. But stay hungry. Like, it's always that principle of keeping your axe sharp. You never know, it's like you might end up feeling like at some point in time, like, man, I used to be able to cut down trees easily with my chainsaw. And now I'm using more gas. I'm using all more time. I'm using more effort from myself to cut down less trees. Why is it? Well, it's because your axe is dull. And so stay sharp, read books, listen to podcasts, connect with other people, stay connected, always be learning something, learn new things that you've never learned before. And so that's one thing that I would certainly say, keep your axe sharp so that you're constantly learning, you're always staying sharp. Another thing that I would say, it comes from Michael Gerber's book, The E Myth Revisited. I don't know if you've ever read that before. It's a fantastic book. And in it, he talks about this principle of, he says, many leaders make the mistake that they get so busy working in their organization, they forget to work on their organization. And I think that's a really important thing, that when you're the leader, it's your job to like, he said the issue that many people get is like, let's say a plumber, for example, they're really good at being a plumber. And so they plumb, they're doing plumbing work and it's great and it's amazing. And people are like, man, you're such a good plumber. You should start your own plumbing job. And he's like, yeah, you know what? I should be my own boss. So they go out and they start their own plumbing job. And then they realize, oh, so I have to do all the plumbing stuff that I was doing, but now I have to do invoicing and I have to work with customers and I have to do customer service and I have to do, oh, now it's growing. So now I have employees that I have to do and I have to do bookkeeping. And I have to do all these things. And he said, and then they get so busy working in their business that they forget to work on their business. And that's why most small businesses end up failing. I think the same thing is true of churches. I mean, you have the same thing experiencing where you have somebody, maybe they're an up and comer, really great preacher. Man, you're a great preacher. You go start your own church. Yeah, you know what? I think I will. I'm going to go start my own church. Start their own church, and they realize, oh wow, I'm a really good preacher, but I'm a terrible leader. Like it's just not a gifting that I have, or it's something that I have to develop. That's going to be more difficult because now I'm doing other things besides just preaching and teaching. Um, And so that is a principle that I think is very important for people is to learn how to delegate well for people, but also learn to work on the business rather than just working in the business, because otherwise you'll just wear yourself out incredibly hard. Another thing I would say is in reference to something I said a minute ago, is always surround yourself with smarter people. If you're always the smartest person in the room, then you're never going to have the best ideas. And I'll say this: I'll shout some praises of you, Tyson, because I love the fact that you are a part of our team. You're an incredibly intimidating person. I don't know if you know this or not, but your intellect is so off the chart. Like I love being around you, but I feel like an idiot sometimes talking to you because I'm like, Tyson knows so much about philosophy and theology and Molinism and all these things. And I'm so impressed by that I absolutely love it. And I love the fact that you're on our team because I mean, like all of our equip stuff, take that for example, all of our equip stuff, Dr. Craig doesn't have time to go through and check out all of the equip courses that Casey Suddeth, our social media director, who is the mastermind, behind all of our equip stuff. Dr. Craig doesn't have time to go in and double check these things to make sure they're sound. But what did Dr. Craig like? Okay, well, Dr. Craig, you don't have time to do this. Let me check with Tyson and see if he has time to do this. Like, I mean, and you have a lot of things on your plate, and I get that. But on the flip side of that, I'm so grateful that you as a team member are somebody that for me, I trust that I can be able to go and say, I don't have to worry about that. Tyson, if he says I have time to do that, I have time to be able to do that. I can step back and go, amazing, that's fantastic, that's great. I'm not going to worry about that then. We'll check in, make sure everything's going well. But at the end of the day, I'm so glad to be able to have a team member who knows more than I do. I mean, and so that's where I think that leaders have to be okay with that, because insecure leaders will always damage their teams. If you can't have people, and I'm not saying that I'm the most secure person. I mean, I have my own insecurities just like everybody else does. But if you are an insecure leader, if you're not secure in who you are, of saying, these are my giftings, these are the things I do really well. I don't do all these other things well, though. You have to, if you're going to be a good leader, you got to know what those things are so that you can then entrust other people with the things that you're not good at. That I don't have the giftings for that. And I'm okay with that. And I'm okay with that person getting the praise for it and me not getting any of it. I'm totally all right with that. So I think that for a good leader needs to be able to be secure in what their giftings are, to be able to know what those things are so that they can be able to then entrust their team members to it. And then one last thing, sorry, I hope this isn't too much for your question. But one thing that I remember always being essential that I remember reading in Jim Collins' book, His Good to Great, is he has a chapter on level 5 leadership. And he said, one of the things that we discovered, he said, I didn't want to include anything about leadership in the book. He said, but one thing that we couldn't get away from, and that was leadership, who the person was that was in charge. And he said, one of the markers of a good leader is the mirror and the window principle, where he said, bad leaders or not as good of leaders, they look in the mirror when things go well. And they look what I did. I did all of these things. But when things go wrong, they look out the window at their teams, at the people. Oh, it's their fault. Well, that person did that. That person did this. That person failed at this. Where he said, but good leaders do the opposite of that. They look in the mirror when things go wrong, because ultimately everything rises and falls on leadership. Jocko, the Navy SEAL, retired Navy SEAL, his book, Extreme Ownership. Everything's your fault. If you're the leader, everything is your fault. It's not your team member's fault. It's because you didn't equip your team member well enough to do a good job. And so therefore it still comes back to you. So extreme ownership of saying, nope, that was my fault. This was my bad. I need to own that and I need to fix it. How can we make it better? But Jim Collins says good leaders look out the window when things go well and give praise to other people. And so I think that is a principle that for leaders, that is something that we have to be active about. Being a good leader is not something you just sort of stumble into. I think certain people have natural propensities and there's spiritual gifts for that as well, right? I mean, Paul says if you have spiritual gift of leadership, utilize that. So I think that there are certain aspects of that may even come natural for some people, or maybe a specific spiritual gift for them. But at the end of the day, leadership is about intentionality. For the most part, you're not just going to stumble into it. You have to hone it as a craft like you would anything else. If you want to know how to play the cello, well, you're going to practice that over and over. You're going to make mistakes, and you got to own those mistakes and learn from those mistakes and get better. And leadership, I think, is the same way. It's a craft that you have to constantly get better at. I feel like I'm a better leader now at 40 than when I was at 30. but I feel like I'm not as good of a leader as what I will be when I'm 50, because I'll have another 10 years and I can learn so much more. So always be hungry to learn, always be reading, always be growing, and always recognize that ultimately it's your fault when things go bad, but recognize the people around you when things go well, because ultimately no leader is an island. If there's nobody following you, then you're just going on a walk. It's John Maxwell. So
Yeah.
so hopefully that's helpful for your audience to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as you guys can see, you can tell why I wanted Michael Lapine on this show, because I think there are a lot of ministries out there that really could benefit from additional leadership
Mm,
training
sure.
and development. I think these are
Mm,
principles that can benefit really any organization out there, right?
yeah,
Be it Christian ministry or
yeah,
secular businesses or anything like that. These are all just sort of timeless principles,
yeah.
but they're so beneficial to Christian ministry as well. And I've just been
Mm,
able to be blessed to see that side of it at Reasonable Faith,
mm,
and your ability to facilitate this, this behemoth team now. Reasonable Faith, you're talking about 40 million engagements in a
yeah,
year. Like, we have so many different channels, so many different
yeah,
things that we're doing, and it's really that those principles of being able to delegate
mm,
well,
sure.
and being able to show, look in the mirror at the right times and look through the
Mm,
window at the correct times.
mm,
You're a master at that. So I hope
mm,
that you guys who are watching this really pay attention to what he's saying, because we need more Christian leaders out
mm,
there. The
yeah,
work is immense,
yeah,
and there's more work out there than we could ever possibly do. So we need to
mhm,
raise up more Christian leaders, and I think you would do well to listen to Michael and heed this wisdom that he's sharing, because we need you, many of you who are watching this, to step up. We're reaching
mm,
a phase, and I've had this discussion with several people, reaching a phase where a lot of the leaders in Christian philosophy, theology, and apologetics are
mm,
getting older, right?
yeah,
We are going to need to continually raise up younger and younger leaders, and we're going to need to share these principles with the next generation of leaders. And
mm,
that's what I'm thrilled
sure,
to do through my company, which I had no intention of starting a couple years ago, but did anyway. We were able to connect with both Christian leaders who are older and have been in the community for a while, but
mm,
also the younger generation who is stepping up. And
mm.
I love seeing, people like you sharing this wisdom. And maybe we'll have to do another one of these where you just, share all the wisdom that you've gathered on leadership principles. But just, I know you've read a lot of books on leadership as well, but what are maybe some of the top two or three you could recommend?
Mm. Yeah, sure. I would say anything that Jim Collins has written. He is one of my favorite. He's a business, Stanford Business School. All of his books, I mean, Good to Great, Built to Last, How the Mighty Fall, are just absolutely fantastic books. So if you haven't, I feel like that's sort of the top level. Everybody has read Good to Great. So definitely get Good to Great, Built to Last. Those. I would say as well, the one I mentioned earlier, Michael Gerber's book, The E-Myth Revisited. That is a fantastic, very practical book. Anything Patrick Lencioni writes, but I would say primarily his book, The Advantage, is sort of Patrick Lencioni writes, they're sort of fables, they're leadership fables. So if people need something a little more engaging, he tells the story, teaches its principles as a fable, and then he has like 10 pages at the end where it's actually like the actual principles. So reading a story about it actually kind of helps. But his book, The Advantage, is all of his fabled books, just the principles, and like each chapter is from one of the different books. So that's one that I would definitely highly recommend as well. And I really enjoyed it, especially depending on where you're at in what level of the organization you're in. But John Maxwell's 360-degree leader, I think that should be essential reading for any leader, because it just teaches you how do I lead up, how do I lead my peers, and how do I lead down. And so it's an absolute essential one. So I would say that one as well. So those would be some that I would immediately just think of off the top of my head. That would be really good for anyone to be able to jump into.
Fantastic. All right. Well, we've been running quite a while now. Let me just ask a couple more questions, and then I'll let you go. But um, let's talk about Dr. Craig just a little bit
Oh, sure.
because you've been his right hand man for years now. You've seen behind the scenes of Dr. Craig,
Mm,
and a lot of people, millions of people out there who see his videos, they only see him in
mm,
front of a camera.
sure,
So they don't really, they see a little bit of personality, but they don't see who the man
mm,
is.
sure.
So what is Dr. Craig like behind the scenes? Is he the same guy as he is in front of the camera? Or does the camera turn off and suddenly, it's like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde? He's like somebody completely.
Sure. Yeah, it's funny. It's funny because I remember what it was like to first meet Dr. Craig, and it was like this sort of celebrity mentality that I had of him. Of just going like, "Oh my goodness, this Dr. Craig, he's going to sign my book for me." All these things, and so when you've worked with somebody for as long as both of us really have, working with Dr. Craig, that celebrity side really just went away a long, long time ago. And so now it becomes more of I think even to your point of he is exactly the same person outside of the mic, off the stage, when the cameras are off, as when he's on stage. He's very gentlemanly. Um, he is, he and Jan's relationship is so, this may sound like this doesn't feel like to me the right word for it, but they have such a sweet relationship.
Mm.
And I mean that really genuinely. The way that he opens the doors for her, and the way that they tenderly speak to each other, and call each other, loving names, and the way that they look out for each other is so, like, honestly, and I've told him this before. So this is something when Jacqueline and I have even traveled with him, I've told Jacqueline. I said, when we get to be their age, that's the type of relationship that I want to have. And so it is a very tender, very sweet, very, very loving relationship that they have with one another. And so I think that's something that many people don't see. He's done a few like questions of the week, I think, on their marriage and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But they're very kind to each other, very respectful, very, very loving, and very sweet to each other. So I think that that's something that people, I don't think that that's anything private. If anyone had a breakfast with them or something like that, they would know that. Um, and so I find him, it's funny that in all of our travels and such, now we have kind of one of that relationship to where we have a mutual trust for one another. He trusts me, I trust him, so that we can even be able to have conversations about life. That sometimes it's like I sometimes have to remind myself when we're having a meal together, this is William Lane Craig sitting across the table from me. That it's like, and I sometimes think about that where I'm like, there are millions of people around the world that would kill for this chance to share a meal with him, and would have all these questions, and yet we're sitting here talking about life and our kids and marriage, and we're just talking as normal human beings, as brothers in Christ. And so it's interesting and it's fun for me. In fact, one of my fondest memories of us is when we were in Brazil. We were doing a Portuguese speaking tour. It was actually when we first met Leandro, who's now our regional chapter director there. And so we were there for, in fact, the anniversary of that was just like a few days ago. It came up on my Facebook memories
Mm.
when we were there, that we were there for over 10 days. And it was just me and him. Jan wasn't there. Jacqueline wasn't there. It was just me and him. And it was a phenomenal tour, but it was a very taxing one. I mean, it was every single day. He had multiple lectures that he was giving. And, so we're getting on airplanes, flying around different places. Thank the Lord Leandro was there with us, because we got onto a plane, and I mean, everybody, it's an in nation, it's everybody speaking Portuguese, nobody speaking English. And me and Dr. Craig, I'm like, okay, let me see if I can pull up a translator app. It's 2018, I think. And, so thank the Lord, Leandro just happened to be there with us. He was traveling around setting up a booth, trying to connect with chapter directors. And so he did some translating for us. And so it was on that trip that Easter was on April 1st. It was on April 1st that year. And so me and him had breakfast on the top of our hotel that was open air. It was overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. And he said, "Hey, why don't we meet in your room, and we'll celebrate Easter together?" I was like, "I think that'd be great." He said, "Maybe we could sing a few songs. We can read the resurrection story." And so that's what we did. So just me and him in this small little hotel room. And so I roughly sang us a couple of songs that morning, and he opened up his Bible, and he read from the biblical text of the resurrection, and then we spent some time in prayer together. And so it was just for me, it's one of those moments that I'll always look back on and treasure. That this was just me and him, and it was not really like oh, this is William Lane Craig, but it's just me and Dr. Craig. It's funny because I still call him Dr. Craig. I can't ever bring myself to call him Bill, even though he told me years ago I could call him Bill. And I'm just like, it's just weird to me. Everybody calls him Bill, and I don't think anything about it. But for me, I'm like, he'll always be Dr. Craig. So it's been such a joy and such a pleasure to know him and Jan, and yeah, as you said, to be able to travel the world with him again. But all of that for me comes back to being helpful. Of like, my goodness, like some of the opportunities that I had to be able to travel with him to make sure that we had things recorded that otherwise would have never been recorded. Now, maybe somebody else on the team, maybe we would have thought about that and somebody else would have been there. But for me, like, I just happened to cross those paths at the right time, that those were the moments that we got to record personal conversations with people, conversations with professors and such that we've recorded that we would have never had, and that are saved for posterity. And so he is truly the same person behind the scenes as he is out in front. He's always been complimented by people for his gentlemanliness on the platform, even when people are attacking him. He's that same way off stage. He can be incredibly witty sometimes. He can be very funny in his own way. And so it's been a joy to work with him and just to get to know him more. And so a lot of that sort of celebrityness goes away, and you really just get to know the man, sort of the man behind the argument, if you will. And yet he is just as intellectual behind the scenes. Like, you're sitting there at a meal or wherever it is, and you're just going like, there's probably not a question at all that I could ask that would stump him. Like, he's always has something to be able to, or if he doesn't feel confident in to say, he'll just go, I don't really have any thoughts on that. Okay, all right, moving on. And so yeah, so it's always interesting in that, where I've always appreciated that about him. He is a man of integrity. And I have always appreciated that most, I think, about him, is that he is willing to just bear the cross of saying, well, this is what I think. This is what I think is the best explanation of this particular thing. It might make people uncomfortable. It might even make me slightly uncomfortable. But at the end of the day, this is the best explanation that I think we have. This is the one I think that is most right, that is most in line with the biblical text. And so this is what I'm going to do. And if I have to take the heat for it, then so be it. And so I have always appreciated that he's a very courageous man in that sense. And this as well as I do, that positions and things with his historical Adam stuff, even this stuff recently about the Canaanite stuff. I mean, he'll just go, I mean, this is what I think is true. And if that means that I get attacked for it, then so be it. And so I've always appreciated that. He's a man of integrity. He's a man of character. He's a man of courage. He's a great man of wisdom, and very kind in his own way, I think, too. And so I think that's often a side of him that people don't see. And so that's certainly something that I could say about him, that I have enjoyed working with both him and Jan, and how they complement each other so well. I know every time I see Jan, she's going to say, hello, brother. She's going to give me a hug. And it's always so wonderful to be able to see them together, to see how much of Reasonable Faith is really their ministry together. It's not, it says Reasonable Faith with William Lane Craig, but you could just add an addendum on there, and Jan Craig. I mean, that's for me, that's something I've shared with them as well. That, I mean, she has been such an integral part of his life and his ministry, from his schooling days all the way up until now. So, and none of that's private. Those are all things that he's expressed publicly as well. So, so I certainly want to protect any privacy things that they may have. But at the end of the day, they are wonderful people, and I wish that everyone had the opportunity to know them the way that I do. And so I know not everybody does, so I count it as a great privilege. But they are both just genuine people that love the Lord, that want to see people be reached. That's always been their heart. It's always been their passion. And so they've made great sacrifices in their lives in order to make sure that that's done and accomplished. So there's much to commend when it comes to Dr. Craig and Jan.
Fantastic. And I absolutely have to agree with you. Like you said,
Yeah.
I've been with the ministry on board as a staffer almost as long as you came
Yep.
on slightly before me. And I absolutely agree. I think Dr. Craig is the exact same person off camera
Yep.
as he is on camera.
Yep.
And when I think of people with an insane amount of integrity, I think of Dr. Craig.
Yes. Yes.
I've
100%.
never seen him being duplicitous or
Yep.
putting out something that he didn't believe in.
Yeah.
What's insane to me is I remember there was somebody who really was heavily criticizing Dr. Craig. They wanted to find some dirt on him, some type of
Mm,
integrity issue.
hmm.
And the only thing they could find that was even remotely negative was they went all the way back to his college papers,
Oh
and
my.
they said, well, he didn't really cite this one like passage, well, and maybe
My.
that's plagiarism. And I'm
Yeah.
like, if you
Wow.
have to go back
Yeah.
to somebody who, Dr. Craig is, in his 70s now, and
Yeah.
you have to go back all the way to college to find some shadow of
Yeah.
integrity issue.
Wow.
God help us. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
I wish we were all like that, Like, I
Yeah.
wish I was
Yeah.
like that. You don't have to go
Yeah.
back very far, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
that's somebody that I look up to as far
Yeah.
as integrity goes. Like, his
Yes.
character to me is unimpeachable, and I
Yes. I
think
agree.
that people who want to see ministry, public ministry done well in a way that
Yes.
preserves the witness of Christ. I think
Yes.
Dr. Craig is a paradigmatic example of that.
Yes. That's where, like, and you know this as well as I do, like when you read some of the comments that people make on Facebook and all these things, you just it it makes you feel angry or frustrated, at least I do to an extent, because I'm just going like, you have no idea what you're talking about. You're criticizing this man's character and you've never even met him before. You don't know anything about him. You just don't like the conclusion of the arguments that he's winning. And so at the end of the day, it does drive you nuts, um and so you just step back and you go, okay, it's sort of who was it? Was it Epictetus or Seneca, one of the Stoic philosophers? They're like, if someone is wrong, then pity them because they don't know any better, and if they're right, then you need to change your mind and accept what they said, kind of a thing. And so I think for me, it certainly just comes back to, yeah, these people are just ignorant. They don't know what they're talking about. They've never met him. They never engaged in a conversation with him. They've never shared a meal with him. They know nothing about this man and his wife. And so as a result, it's just like, okay, let's just forget about that. That's the way people are, unfortunately, today. They have to attack things that they deem to be very good because people like to see great men fall. And so as a result of that, I 100% want to echo what you just said, is that knowing, like, I don't have to be afraid that something's going to come out about Dr. Craig. Like, I'm not worried about that, working with him and tying, I think for both you and I, our names to him and Jan and the Reasonable Faith Ministry. I can step back and go, I'm not worried about anything coming out or anything. Like, no, this is great. This is a man of integrity that we can be able to come in and say, how can we make sure and preserve that legacy for future generations? Because I genuinely believe, as I know you do as well, that the work that he's doing, that they are doing, is so instrumental that people 100 years from now will be reading about his work on God and abstract objects, God and God's relationship to time, and his work on the atonement, all of those things. So to go, God, I don't care if anybody remembers my name, but I do want to be able to do everything that I can to help make sure and perpetuate the work that he's done, so that continuous future generations can be able to continue to be impacted by it.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of the ministry and its future and thinking, years and decades and
Mm,
centuries down the road, what is on the horizon for the Reasonable Faith Ministry? We've
mm,
already talked about the incorporation of AI.
yeah.
Is there anything else? What do we have in store, and what's the vision?
Yeah, one of the things he even mentioned this in his recent monthly report is some of the negotiations that we're currently going on with to establish this center, the William Lane Craig Center for Christian Apologetics, Philosophy, and Theology. And so I'm really excited about where we're at. And so I'm praying and hoping that this year we'll be able to announce some things. That's my hope. That is my goal. This has been a long time coming. We've been working on this, talking with different universities and talking with different organizations and things like that. And so he has mentioned that in his last monthly report. If anybody missed that, they can go back through and they can be able to read that. And he just mentions it briefly, so I'll be brief on it as well. I don't certainly want to give anything away, but we are. I'm very excited about that. I think that there are some real possibilities here. I'm not saying it's not 100%. Nobody signed anything or anything like that, but I think that's a huge thing. I think for all of us, and I think for many followers of Reasonable Faith as well, because to be able to again take the work that he has done to help perpetuate the growth of future Christian philosophers and theologians and apologists based upon his work. Yes, so much of it So how can we be able to produce the next generation? That's kind of where our mind is, sort of wrapping about those things and thinking about them. You already mentioned the use of AI. You know, some of the things we're thinking about with the use of AI. I'm like, my goodness, like at some point in time, the Lord is going to take Dr. Craig home. But with the way AI is, I mean, it's not going to be very long before somebody can have a virtual conversation with Dr. Craig based upon all of his work and actually see an avatar of him that looks just like him and be able to have a conversation with him about topics that he's written about, right? I mean, we're not very far away from that. You can already do some of that.
Yeah.
And so that is certainly on our horizon of going, how can we utilize new technology? One of our board members is well into technology. He's been in technology for decades. He's a brilliant guy. He and I have had some conversations. I've been talking with some other guys that I know who are already utilizing AI in their own fields of expertise that have nothing to do with ministry or anything. But hey, we've been building these things and talking to them like, okay, how can we create some things that, again, help us work smarter, not harder? And how can we continually perpetuate this content? You know, when you have AI bots and stuff that can answer based upon a particular set of content that, oh, if somebody asks it in Portuguese, it automatically translates into Portuguese and it answers them in Portuguese. And they can have a conversation with Dr. Craig in a sense. So these are things that I think will be instrumental for us moving forward into the future. And I think too, you know, it'll just be helpful for us to, as we reach even more people around the world, that's going to have a greater impact for us. So these are just some of the quick things that are right here in front of us that we're going to be looking at. And then of course looking at what do things look like 10 years from now, 50 years from now, and how can we help to preserve the content, which is another reason why we started the Equip platform, a free platform that walks people through the mountain of content that we have. We have so much content. So how do people walk through that? How can we train people? So we're constantly creating new courses for that. Casey Suddeth, who oversees that on our team, he's already sent me a whole list of things. So anybody watching, if they're on the Equip platform, be on the lookout because we're going to be getting some feedback from our users, some almost 8,000 now that are using the platform that have created accounts on there, of saying, okay, here's our top dozen courses that we want to see designed, but what is the order that you would like to see them in? You know, what's some real feedback we can get from people, whether that's a course on Molinism or a little bit more, some things on the resurrection and just God's relationship to time. You know, what kind of courses can we create now so that people can be able to utilize and consume this content even more? So these are all some of the things that we're thinking about. How can we continually create more on-ramps for people? We have everything from children's books all the way to scholarly works from Dr. Craig. So how can we create more on-ramps for people to be able to say, no matter where you are in that spectrum, you can be able to jump on this train and move forward and grow in your progress so that you can learn and gradually walk through all of the content that we have, sort of a guided tour through all of this, so that no matter where you're at, you can be able to jump in and be able to learn and grow in the midst of it.
Yeah, fantastic. You mentioned the Equip platform. If you guys haven't checked it out, it's knowwhyyoubelieve.org. So go there, check it out, and it's a fantastic free online course platform. Free, completely free. So if you want to engage with Dr. Craig's work, it's basically like a lot of videos and articles that we have collected on certain topics, and we take you through all of those, and there are quizzes on each one of those, so you can test, you know, whether or not you're actually comprehending the material. And it's just fantastic for, you know, our chapters to go through. We've had some chapters take their chapter members to go through them, small groups and things like that. So go check it out and give us some feedback on it. Knowwhyyoubelieve.org. So yeah, that's fantastic. Anything else, you know, any other aspects of Reasonable Faith that you want to share that's on the horizon?
Yeah, well, just something that's coming up real quick here. I mean, I hate to, maybe you may or may not want me to throw this out right now, but we are about to start our spring campaign. And so we are actually going to be utilizing for people who sign up to become a strategic partner of Reasonable Faith, who give on a month. Our strategic partners are those partners that give financially on a monthly basis on a recurring gift. And so for our spring campaign, for people who sign up to become a recurring donor, a strategic partner, we actually send them books, and all of these that are signed by Dr. Craig. And so for the first time, it's really exciting for me, I think, is his two books. You have to forgive, they're long titles, so maybe you remember what they are. One of them is Assessing the New Testament Evidence, and I can't remember what the other one is off the top of my head. That's very poor on my part, but both of them have always been, $400, $500, because they've just been so expensive before, from the publishers. And that's something that sometimes people don't understand. Like Dr. Craig doesn't set the price of his books, the
Yeah.
publishers do. Right. So I think sometimes I feel like he's caught flack for that online, that it's like, oh, well, why does he charge? It's like, he doesn't pick that. He doesn't hardly get anything from that. It's the publishers who go, yeah, not too many people are going to read this academic book, so we're going to make it really expensive for people. And so those books we're now going to be able to give away at a much discounted rate. So as a part of that, so if somebody signs up, for example, to become a $75 or greater donor, they'll actually get both of those books, that have been just out of reach for most people before. So I'm really excited about that, to be able to provide some fresh resources for people, that will give them a much deeper, in-depth look at the evidence for the resurrection and work that Dr. Craig has done. That really, for the most part, most people, even though it's older content, most people have never read it before. So it's almost like it's brand new content. And
Right.
it's also signed. It's signed, by Dr. Craig. And it's interesting too. I don't think you would mind me mentioning this. In fact, I think it actually makes it quite unique. I think it's the first 40 books that we've gotten in for this, actually have the printers, when they printed them, didn't change and take out some of the handwritten notes and corrections that Dr. Craig made in the manuscript. And so they actually have some of his handwritten notes that are in them. And so there's only 40 copies, so it's like first 40 people, I guess, that sign up. And
Hold
so
on,
it's
hold on.
really
We need to
interesting.
go offline real quick so I can ask
Yeah, yeah,
a
yeah. And so it's really neat, So they're signed copies. It'll be a really unique thing that he's got some handwritten notes that are in them.
Oh,
I can't
wow.
remember exactly how many. He didn't tell me how many there are, but I know that there are some in the book. So it's not throughout the entire book, but at least there are some parts of it that do have some marks in it. So really neat. Just something that's exciting, something that's new. It's older content, like I said, but it's almost like it's new because we've never been able to give it away before. So I'm really excited about that, and looking forward to it. We can't do what we do without the strategic partners and the financial partners that we have, and so I'm grateful for people all around the world who participate and say we believe in this ministry, and so we give where it counts, and that's with our financial support, and that's to be able to help us to continually perpetuate the work that we're doing with Reasonable Faith, through whether that's through the chapters all around the world, to be able to see them continue to grow and have the content and the material that they need, or whether that's through videos and continuing the website and just all of these things that we're doing. So yeah, so it's all this sort of work in progress that we're constantly trying to do new things. Even our new animation series that we're doing, we're Jim Zengmeister, who does all of our animation videos. We're doing this whole series on the attributes of God that I think have been fantastic so far. And
Yeah.
we still have, I think, another 6 to 7 more videos in this series that are going to come out. I mean, it's a little bit heavier than our previous animation videos, but my goodness, is it good content. I mean, if somebody's in a church, they could utilize these and use them for series that they're doing, or Sunday school classes, or small groups that just focus on the attributes of God. I mean, it's just absolutely fantastic, videos that we're producing that are constantly in the work. And so we will still be doing those over the next few years. It's going to take us to do those, but it's great, fresh content from Dr. Craig. And then, of course, his systematic theology that he's working on, that just continually moves forward, and it is very exciting to be able to see that. I cannot wait for us to be able to give that away, as an incentive. So we'll see as all that continues to progress. Follow his newsletter, to be able to see more updates on that. But really exciting to see some of these things taking place.
Fantastic. Well, you heard him. The ministry can't run without supporters. And so there's a really good time to donate to Reasonable Faith so that we can continue doing perpetuating the incredible work
Yeah.
of the ministry. For people who are interested in getting involved in Reasonable Faith, maybe not just donors, but who
Mhm.
actually want to be a part of the Reasonable Faith ministry, what are some of their options?
Yeah. Well, I think the first one that certainly comes to mind is the area that you yourself oversee, and that is getting involved in our chapters. That really is sort of the hands-on. I always feel like our chapters are the hands and feet of the ministry, because we are such a digital ministry. We don't really have the interpersonal reactions. We through comments and things like that, but those are digital engagements. Whereas I feel like the real hands-on, soldiers on the front lines are our chapter directors, and the people that fill those chapters that are faithful to doing that. I mean, we haven't even really talked about our chapters a whole lot in this interview, but my goodness, the people all around the world, the faithfulness of our chapter directors, and you could speak more to this obviously than any, because you're so well connected with them since you oversee our chapters. But the fact that they are constantly, monthly, sometimes even weekly, doing digital groups or in-person groups where they're preparing content, they're bringing together content, they are gathering groups together, they're getting snacks together, they're doing, they're their own leaders in their own right. That really the whole vision of our chapters is that we are empowering other people to be leaders in their community in the world of apologetics. Right. So I think that if somebody's looking to be connected with the ministry, that is the greatest way for them to be able to do so, to be able to say, well, I don't have anything like that in my area. Well, maybe you don't have anything in your area like that. And God is speaking to your heart to say, I need to be a part of that. I need to get involved. It's time to get off the bench. It's time to get in the game. And how can I help move the ball forward in my area and in my community, in my church? And some people meet in churches, some people meet in libraries, some people meet in their homes, some people meet all over the place. So I would really encourage people to be able to either find a chapter in your area, and if there isn't one, become a chapter director. Become one of those people that you become the seed that grows to produce incredible fruit in your area and in your circle of influence. And start that group from scratch. Start with your friends, start with your family, start with people in your church, and slowly start to build those relationships with people so that you're having a real impact in your community beyond what you could have done before. And of course, we have tools and we have all kinds of different materials and things that we send to people. So I feel like we do a good job equipping our chapter directors so that it's not like, hey, you go through this process and then there you go, now go do it. But there's a whole network of people and tools and materials that we provide for chapter directors. We kind of call it our chapter in a box, because that's what we kind of hope that it would be like. Hey, here's all of this material. Now, certainly there's aspects, I think, and I know you would agree with this, that it's going to take some work on your part. Like, you're going to have to go be a leader now, and you're going to need to develop, and you're going to need to grow. But my goodness, I think that one of the greatest things people can do is to be able to set up shop in their own communities, in their own circles of influence, and say, okay, I need to become the leader that other people need in my community. There are lost people in my community that God knew that I would do this, and so therefore I'm going to do that, to cross paths with them so that they can be able to be saved and come to a saving knowledge of Christ. And I hope that your listeners will think about that, pray about that, and seek the Lord about, maybe this is something that I need to do. And certainly with reasonable faith, I would say, is one of the best that you can be able to get in connected with. Tyson will personally grade your examination as you come into the ministry. So,
Right.
that would be the place that I would certainly send people to say, this is where you can be able to have a real impact in your community.
Yeah. And I do want to second the fact that our chapters are having an impact.
Yeah.
Just thinking about one of the outstanding stories that comes out of our
Yeah.
chapters is we have a chapter in Nepal. And I
Yeah.
always share the story because it's just amazing to me.
Yeah.
But
It is.
Kathmandu, Nepal, it's like
Mm.
who's
Yeah.
ever, who thinks about Nepal and Christian apologetics. But we have a chapter director there, and he
Mm.
decided he was going to go out and evangelize this nomadic
Mm.
tribe in a remote region that had never heard the gospel. And so
Mm.
he goes out, they're called the Rauta people, maybe a few hundred people total. And he shares the gospel with them. And
Mm.
he sent us pictures. He's wearing this same shirt, this Reasonable Faith
Yeah.
shirt, and he's out in Nepal sharing the gospel. And
Yeah.
those are the type of people that you get connected to by
Yes.
being one of the chapter directors with Reasonable Faith. It's a network of
Mm.
incredible people doing
Yeah.
incredible work for the kingdom of God. There are
Yeah.
people who are saved through the efforts of these chapters. I've seen pictures of people getting baptized as a result. So,
That's awesome.
these stories get multiplied, and like you said,
Mm.
these are the front lines. And so we
Yeah.
need more leaders.
Yeah.
We want to add 1,000 more chapters,
Yeah.
10,000. So if you feel the Lord leading you to become a
Yeah.
Christian leader, this is one way where you
Yeah.
can get your feet wet. You can
Yeah.
get in and really be equipped.
Yeah.
The ministry itself offers materials to help people become established in their areas and
Yep.
have a platform for sharing the gospel, for sharing Christian apologetics, and really creating an impact. So like Michael said, I can't recommend that enough for getting involved in the Reasonable Faith ministry.
Yep. Absolutely.
Um, and then just in general, you've already talked about our partners and monthly supporters. So, is there any other way that if people are interested in supporting Reasonable Faith as a ministry, what are some of the best ways to do that?
Sure. Well, first of all, I mean, I would say most certainly be in prayer for for Reasonable Faith and be in prayer for Dr. Craig. I am regularly praying that God gives him strength as he is writing this philosophical systematic theology. It is sort of the magnum opus, I think, of his life. It is the culmination of all of the work that he is doing and has done. Um, so I say that first because I think it is the most important thing that we can possibly do, which is pray for the ministry, pray for our team members, pray for Dr. Craig and Jen, that God keeps them in good health, that God continues to bring to his mind all of the things that he needs to in order to write that it will have long lasting impacts. Um, the second thing, as I said, was becoming a chapter director. Thirdly, I would again just reiterate becoming a financial partner of Reasonable Faith. We call them partners because that's what we really believe that it is. I'm not really interested in somebody just going, hey, I'm just going to give this because it's a nonprofit tax deductible gift. That's
Mhm.
great. I mean, that's awesome. I praise the Lord for it. But at the end of the day, we want people who say we believe in this ministry. We believe in perpetuating the gospel, and by helping to tear down intellectual barriers that keep people from coming to know Christ. That is what Reasonable Faith, we are providing an articulate, intelligent defense of the Christian faith that is uncompromising and yet is gracious in the public arena. So that's what our goal is. That's what we want to see happen. And so financial partners that do that, that's what we hopefully are continually growing in, is people who believe in the mission, who say, I may not be able to do that, but I can financially give to be able to be a part of that. So that would certainly be something that I would say is a part of that as well. And certainly if there are openings that we eventually have on our team, we'll certainly be able to make those known. As a result of that, we're looking for people who can be able to again, coming back to, I feel like the thing that most people can be able to do is, yes, one, they can be a financial partner, but they can be able to be involved in a chapter. They can be active in growing in their faith. And that would be maybe the fourth thing that I would say, is for people to really take personal ownership. One of the best things that you can do to become a part of Reasonable Faith is to utilize the content of Reasonable Faith in your own life and in your own ministry. I mean,
Mm.
let's be honest. That is one of the greatest things. That's the most rewarding things for us, is when we get emails from pastors and teachers and Sunday school leaders and teachers in schools and all that stuff that say, hey, can I utilize your content? Yes, you can utilize the content. That's why it's all free. We make it free so that people can use it. So one of the greatest things that you can do to be a part of Reasonable Faith is first of all utilizing it to grow in your own confidence and sharing your faith, and secondly of all, utilizing it in your own ministries. That's one of the goals that we have. That's why we make it for free. So one of the best things you can do with Reasonable Faith is to be able to utilize it, to utilize what we are creating, so that you can be able to grow, so that you can make a difference in your community. And that's ultimately, I think, one of the best things that we can be able to do, is to be able to see people change the lives of the people in their own communities by utilizing the content that we have.
Mm. I think that is a beautiful way to end things. Reasonable Faith has been such a huge blessing for me, even before I was connected with the ministry. And I know I speak for thousands and thousands of people out there in saying that, the content that it produces, the character of Dr. Craig, just all of the resources that are available for absolutely free that the ministry puts
Yes.
out. I mean, can you imagine if we were to put a price on all of that,
Yeah.
how much that would be?
Sure.
And it's all available for free except for the books,
Yep.
basically.
Yep.
So, this is not possible without partners. And
Sure.
so you guys
That's right.
have been huge in continuing the work of Dr. Craig and helping it
Yep.
to spread across the world. So we hope that it blesses you, and that in
Yep.
return, you can bless the ministry as well. Um, to wrap things up, Michael, you have been a fantastic guest, and I'm so appreciative of this
Thank you.
time that you've given to us to share your wisdom. And I hope that this has been beneficial to people in many different ways, but ultimately that they will see, a little bit behind the scenes what it takes for the Reasonable Faith Ministry to run. So thank you so much for sharing all of this with us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Tyson. I enjoyed it.